It was a busy morning in the county courthouse. The hallways were full of people, lawyers holding files, families waiting on benches, and officers standing by the doors keeping order. Officer Daniel Cooper was one of them. He had worked in law enforcement for almost 15 years. He believed in discipline, rules, and respect. But he also carried a bad habit. He judged people by how they looked, not who they were. His sharp eyes often narrowed when he saw anyone he thought didn't belong in a place like this. That morning, Daniel stood near the courtroom entrance, checking IDs as people passed through. His uniform was pressed, his badge shining. He felt important, almost untouchable. To him, every person who walked in was either a suspect, a troublemaker, or someone who needed to be told what to do. He took pride in being firm, but sometimes that firmness crossed into arrogance. Just before the court session began, a tall black man entered quietly through the main doors. He wore a clean gray suit, carried a leather folder, and walked with calm confidence. His shoes were polished, and there was something in his manner steady and respectful. But Daniel didn't see that. All he noticed was that the man wasn't someone he recognized, and he didn't seem to show the kind of nervousness most people did around the police. The man approached the security table. Daniel looked him up and down. "You here for court?" he asked sharply. "Yes," the man replied politely. His voice was calm. "I'm here for the morning session." Daniel frowned. "Defendant or witness?" The man smiled slightly. "Neither. I'm here to observe." That answer bothered Daniel. In his mind, people didn't just observe court unless they were connected to something. He didn't know this man's name, and his tone seemed too relaxed. Without realizing it, Daniel began to feel offended by that calm confidence. The man reached into his folder to show his pass, but as he stepped forward, his shoulder brushed lightly against Daniel's arm. It wasn't rough, just a small accident. But Daniel reacted immediately. He grabbed the man's arm and barked, "Watch where you're going." His voice was loud enough that people in the hall turned their heads. The man looked surprised, but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It was an accident." Daniel's pride burned. He felt like the man's calmness was a challenge. "Accident or not, you show respect in here," he snapped. The man opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Daniel's anger got the better of him. He lifted his hand and struck the man lightly on the side of his face, a sharp, humiliating gesture rather than a hard blow. For a second, everything stopped. The hallway went silent. Lawyers froze with papers in hand. Even the court clerk stopped typing. The sound of the slap, though not loud, echoed in everyone's mind. The man didn't react with anger. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move toward Daniel. He simply stood still and looked at him. His eyes were calm, steady, deep, and full of disappointment, not rage. That quiet stare made Daniel feel smaller than he ever had before. But Daniel was too proud to admit he was wrong. He stepped back, straightened his uniform, and muttered under his breath, "People need to learn their place." Those words hung in the air like smoke. The judge's assistant, who had just stepped into the hallway, froze when she saw the scene. "Officer Cooper, what happened?" she asked sharply. Daniel shrugged. "Nothing serious. Just handling a disrespectful visitor." The black man turned to her, still composed. "It's all right," he said softly. "No harm done." Then he picked up his folder, gave Daniel one last calm look, and walked toward the courtroom door. The silence continued even after he left. A young clerk whispered, "Did he really just do that?" Another lawyer shook his head. "He's going to regret it." Daniel tried to brush it off. He stood at his post again, pretending everything was fine. But inside, his stomach felt uneasy. Something about that man's calm face stayed in his mind. It wasn't fear or anger, just a quiet authority that he couldn't explain. Inside the courtroom, The session began a few minutes later. Daniel stayed near the back door, still on duty. The same man was sitting quietly in the front row, his folder on his lap. Every now and then, a few officers near the judge's bench glanced his way, whispering to each other. Daniel couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could tell they knew him. That made Daniel more nervous. During a short recess, one of the clerks passed by Daniel and whispered, "You know who that is, right?" Daniel frowned. "No. Some lawyer or witness, I guess." The clerk shook her head. "That's not just anyone. The new police commissioner is supposed to be here today. They said he was coming in quietly before his public introduction this afternoon." Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. "What do you mean, the new commissioner?" The clerk looked toward the man in the gray suit, who was now speaking softly with the judge. "Him," she said. "I think that's him." Daniel froze. His mind went blank. The man he had shouted at, the one he had humiliated in front of everyone, was possibly the highest-ranking officer in the whole department. A man with the power to fire him, demote him, or worse. He tried to steady his breathing, but his hands started to tremble. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt afraid, not because of punishment, but because he realized what his action truly meant. He had judged someone without knowing who they were. He had let his pride speak louder than his duty. Moments later, the judge returned to the courtroom, looking unusually serious. She glanced toward Daniel for a brief second, then at the man in the front row. "We'll take a short break," she announced, her tone firm. "Everyone, please stand." The man rose from his seat with quiet grace. Daniel lowered his eyes as he passed. Their eyes met for half a second, and in that silence, Daniel knew without any words that his day was about to change in a way he never imagined. When the man walked out of the room, 2 senior officers entered behind him. They whispered something to the judge and nodded toward the exit. Daniel's throat felt dry. The hallway outside filled with murmurs, and soon everyone seemed to know what had happened. Daniel remained at his post, but he could no longer stand tall. His confidence had turned into dread. He stared at the courtroom door, hearing his own heartbeat in his ears. He didn't know the man's name yet. He didn't know what would happen next. But deep inside, he already understood one thing clearly. He had made a terrible mistake. Not just as an officer, but as a human being. And somewhere down that quiet hallway, the man he had struck was speaking softly to the judge and senior officers, not with anger, but with calm disappointment that would soon make the whole courthouse stop and listen. That was the beginning of a day Officer Daniel Cooper would never forget. It was the day when pride met humility, and a single careless moment began a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The silence in the courthouse felt heavier than any noise Daniel had ever heard. After the incident, whispers followed him wherever he walked. He tried to stay focused on his duty, but everyone seemed to glance at him with mixed looks, some with shock, others with quiet judgment. Even his fellow officers avoided his eyes. He kept pretending everything was fine, but deep down, fear began to grow inside him. The man he had slapped calm and quiet had disappeared into the judge's chambers right after the recess. 2 senior officers had gone in with him, and the door was closed for a long time. Daniel stood by the hallway outside, trying to look normal, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every minute felt longer than the last. He wanted to know what was being said in that room, but he also didn't. A young clerk passed by and whispered to another, "That's him, the new police commissioner." He was supposed to meet the judge before the afternoon press conference. The words hit Daniel like a punch in the chest. His mouth went dry. "No," he muttered to himself, trying to deny it. "It can't be. It's just a rumor." But the way everyone was acting said otherwise. The bailiff, a man who had worked there for years, avoided Daniel completely. Usually, they joked between sessions, but now the bailiff simply walked past without a word. Daniel could feel the change in the air. The respect he thought he had earned over the years was slipping away. One quiet look at a time. He paced the hallway, his mind spinning. What if it's true? He thought. What if that man really is the new commissioner? If that was the case, his career was over. A single moment of pride, one careless act, could erase 15 years of service. He had always thought of himself as a strong officer, someone who didn't need to answer to anyone. But now, for the first time, he felt small. Then the chamber door opened. The judge stepped out, her face serious and unreadable. She didn't look directly at Daniel, but spoke softly to the bailiff. "Prepare the courtroom again. There will be an announcement." The man in the gray suit followed her out. His face was calm, his posture straight. He didn't look angry, just thoughtful. That calmness made Daniel even more nervous. He would have preferred shouting or scolding. Silence felt worse. The man walked toward the courtroom doors, and as he passed Daniel, he paused for a moment. He looked at him, not with hate, but with quiet authority. "I hope you remember your words, officer," he said in a low, steady voice. Respect works both ways. Daniel couldn't speak. He just nodded weakly. The man walked into the courtroom, and the senior officers followed him. The doors closed behind them. Inside, murmurs filled the air again. The journalists who had been covering another case began setting up cameras. The courthouse had suddenly become busier than usual. People sensed something important was about to happen. Daniel stayed near the door, too afraid to step inside, but too anxious to walk away. He could hear faint voices from within, someone addressing the crowd, the judge making an introduction. Then came the sound of polite applause. Daniel's heart pounded faster. The door opened again, and an officer whispered, "They're introducing the new police commissioner right now." Daniel leaned against the wall, his breath quickening. "It's true," he thought. "It really is him." His entire body felt cold. Every scene from that morning flashed in his mind again. The way he spoke to the man, the way he raised his hand, the way the entire hallway had fallen silent. For the next half hour, Daniel stood motionless. His pride had disappeared, replaced by guilt and fear. When the courtroom doors opened again, the reporters came rushing out, talking quickly, holding their microphones high. "New Commissioner Michael Lawson visits courthouse," one said. "Big day for the department," said another. Daniel heard the name clearly this time, Michael Lawson. That was it. That was the man's name. Commissioner Lawson walked out a moment later, surrounded by officers. Cameras flashed. People smiled and shook his hand. He thanked them all with a humble nod, his calm voice carrying through the hall. "I look forward to working with all of you," he said. His eyes, however, briefly landed on Daniel. For just a second, Daniel met that gaze. There was no anger, just disappointment and a quiet strength that made Daniel lower his head. As soon as the commissioner and his team left, Daniel leaned against the wall, trying to steady himself. He knew what was coming next: an investigation, suspension, maybe even dismissal. It wasn't just about breaking protocol anymore. It was about his attitude, his behavior, and what that said about the department. By the afternoon, his worst fear came true. He received a call from his captain, asking him to report to the Internal Affairs office immediately. When he arrived, everyone in the hallway looked at him differently. The same people who used to greet him now stayed silent. He walked in feeling like the ground beneath him had disappeared. Inside the meeting room, 2 officers were waiting. One of them slid a paper across the table. "Officer Cooper, you're being placed on temporary suspension pending investigation," he said. "You're aware of the incident this morning, correct?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Do you have anything to say?" Daniel hesitated. His throat tightened. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "It wasn't my intention to." The officer cut him off gently. Your intentions don't matter right now. What matters is what you did. The new commissioner wants a full report. You'll be notified about your hearing date soon. Daniel nodded again, unable to speak. He signed the papers and stood up. As he left the room, everything around him felt distant. The sound of footsteps, the buzz of the lights, the chatter of people in the hallway. His world had gone quiet. Outside the station, the afternoon sun felt harsh. Daniel sat in his car, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. For years, he had seen himself as the man in control, the one others respected, even feared a little. But now, he saw someone else. Someone who had let pride blind him to basic humanity. At home that evening, he sat alone in silence. His badge lay on the table beside his phone. He thought about calling someone, maybe his partner, maybe his sergeant. But what could he say? That he had struck the new commissioner? That he had lost everything because of one careless moment? He turned on the TV and saw a local news report. The headline read, "New Police Commissioner Promises Reform, Emphasizes Respect and Equality." There was Michael Lawson speaking in front of cameras. "Our goal," he said, "is to rebuild trust between officers and the community. Respect must come from both sides. Change begins with accountability." Daniel turned off the TV, his chest heavy. Those words weren't aimed at him directly, but he felt every one of them. He understood now that the man he had misjudged wasn't just his superior. He was someone trying to fix the very problem Daniel had become a part of. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the calm face of Commissioner Lawson, the quiet strength, the disappointment, and the dignity that made him feel smaller than any punishment ever could. He knew that tomorrow would bring consequences. But more than fear, he felt something else for the first time: regret. Not just for what he had done, but for the kind of man he had allowed himself to become. And deep inside, for reasons he couldn't explain, he hoped that somehow, one day, he might get the chance to face Commissioner Lawson again, not as the man who had disrespected him, but as someone who had finally learned what respect truly meant. The next morning came with a heavy sky, gray and quiet. Daniel barely slept that night. He had turned over in bed again and again, replaying every second of what had happened at the courthouse. Each time he tried to convince himself it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Another image returned, the calm eyes of Commissioner Michael Lawson looking right into his. There was no hate in those eyes, just a silent disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. Daniel put on a plain shirt instead of his uniform. His badge was still lying on the kitchen table, right next to the suspension letter he had received the day before. The words, "pending internal review," seemed to stare back at him. He had never imagined that one single moment could change everything. For 15 years, he'd been proud to wear that badge. Now it felt like a reminder of how far he had fallen. He didn't have to report to duty, but he couldn't sit at home doing nothing. So he decided to drive to the courthouse. He told himself it was just to clear up some paperwork, but deep down, he wanted to see if Commissioner Lawson was there. Maybe he could apologize, or at least face him one more time. When Daniel arrived, the courthouse was busier than usual. Reporters stood outside, talking into microphones. The big story of the day was the new commissioner's first official address to the public. Daniel parked far away and stood by the edge of the crowd, blending in with the bystanders. Inside, the courtroom had been arranged differently. The judge's bench was decorated with flowers, and rows of chairs were filled with officers, officials, and journalists. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doors opened, and Commissioner Lawson walked in. Everyone stood. Cameras flashed, and whispers moved through the room like a wave. Daniel stood in the back corner, his hands shaking slightly. The commissioner was dressed in a dark suit again, but this time, he wore a badge on his chest that shone under the lights. He walked with quiet confidence, greeting people warmly as he passed. There was no arrogance in him, just calm authority. The judge stepped forward to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "please welcome our new police commissioner, Mr. Michael Lawson." Applause filled the room. Daniel clapped slowly, feeling the weight of what those words meant. The man he had humiliated less than 24 hours ago now stood at the highest position in the entire county police department. Commissioner Lawson smiled politely and began to speak. His voice was deep but gentle, the kind that carried across the room without shouting. "Thank you all," he said. "It's an honor to stand here today. My goal is simple: to bring respect, fairness, and trust back into every corner of our service. These values are not optional. They are the foundation of law itself." The room grew quiet as he continued. "Yesterday, I experienced something that reminded me why I accepted this role. It wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary. Sometimes, life gives us moments that test who we truly are. And sometimes, those moments test others too." Daniel felt his stomach twist. He knew exactly what the commissioner was talking about. Everyone did. A few people turned slightly in his direction. He wished the floor would open and swallow him. Lawson didn't mention names, but his message was clear. "In this department," he said, "there will be no place for arrogance, prejudice, or abuse of power. Every officer, no matter rank or background, must understand that respect is not demanded by force. It is earned through character." Applause followed, loud and genuine. Even Daniel, with his heart heavy, couldn't deny the truth in those words. The commissioner ended with a simple statement. "We wear the badge not to show power over others, but to serve with humility." When the event ended, people stood to shake hands and take pictures. Daniel stayed where he was, not daring to move. But as the crowd thinned, he noticed Commissioner Lawson walking toward him. His heart stopped. Lawson stopped a few steps away and looked directly at him. "Officer Cooper," he said softly. Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes, sir," he answered. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lawson said, "You were here yesterday. You remember what happened?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir. I remember every second." Lawson's tone remained calm. "Do you understand why it was wrong?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded again. "Yes, sir. I judged someone without reason. I acted out of pride, not duty. I embarrassed myself and the department." Lawson studied his face. "Do you think respect is something that only flows one way?" "No, sir," Daniel said quietly. "It's something we have to give before we can receive it." The commissioner nodded slowly, his expression softening just a little. "Good. That's the first step." Daniel took a deep breath. "Sir, I want to say I'm sorry for everything. I can't undo it, but I'll accept whatever decision is made. I just wanted to tell you face to face." For a moment, Lawson didn't reply. Then he said, "You made a mistake, Officer Cooper. But I don't believe in ending a man's career over one mistake. What I do believe in is accountability and change. You'll have your hearing next week. Until then, think about who you want to be when you walk back into that room." Daniel felt tears burn behind his eyes. He hadn't expected mercy, but here it was, offered with quiet grace. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. Lawson nodded and turned to leave. As he walked away, Daniel felt something shift inside him. For years, he had thought strength came from authority and control. But now, watching Lawson handle power with calm and compassion, he realized real strength looked nothing like what he had imagined. Later that day, Daniel returned home and sat on his porch, staring at the sunset. For the first time in years, he thought about the kind of officer he used to dream of becoming. The one who helped people, who treated everyone fairly, who wore the uniform with honor instead of pride. Somewhere along the line, he had lost that version of himself. He thought about the commissioner's words. Respect must be earned through character. Those words echoed in his mind. He spent too long demanding respect instead of showing it. The next morning, he woke up early and went for a walk around the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, the air fresh. He passed by a small cafe and saw a young man helping an elderly woman carry her groceries. For a moment, Daniel stopped and watched. That simple act of kindness reminded him of something he had forgotten, that the badge was supposed to represent service, not superiority. In that moment, Daniel made a silent promise. If he ever got the chance to wear his badge again, he would do it differently. He would listen more. He would see people for who they were, not what they looked like. He would become the kind of officer the new commissioner believed in. He didn't know what the hearing would decide. He didn't know if his career could be saved. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose again. The man he had disrespected had become the very person who inspired him to change. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Daniel knew this wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of something new, the long, hard road toward redemption and true respect. The week before the hearing passed slowly, like time itself was punishing Daniel. Every day he woke up early, even though he had nowhere to report. His uniform hung untouched in his closet. The badge he once polished with pride now rested in a small box on his kitchen table. It was strange how silent his home felt without the sound of the police radio or the weight of his belt on his waist. For 15 years, those things had been part of him. Now, they were just memories of a man who had lost control of his own judgment. Daniel tried to stay busy. He cleaned the house, walked around the block, and read old journals where he had written notes from his early training days. In those notes, he found words like honor, service, and respect. They felt distant now, like pieces of a different man's life. He couldn't escape the whispers. Every time he went out to buy groceries or fill his car, he caught people looking at him. Some recognized him from the news. Others just seemed to know something had happened. "That's him," someone once whispered near the parking lot. Daniel kept his head down and walked away. He didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. Deep down, he knew he deserved their judgment. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. It was held inside the same courthouse where everything had started. Daniel put on his uniform again. It felt heavier than ever. The fabric scratched against his skin, and the badge on his chest felt cold. He stood in front of the mirror and took a deep breath. "Face it like a man," he whispered to himself. "No excuses." When he reached the courthouse, a small group of reporters waited outside. Cameras clicked as he walked up the steps, but he didn't stop to answer questions. Inside, the air was tense. Officers from different departments sat in the audience, along with community leaders and a few journalists. At the front of the room sat 3 people from the disciplinary board, and in the center was Commissioner Michael Lawson. Daniel's heart raced. He tried to look calm, but his hands trembled slightly. The commissioner looked up as Daniel entered, his expression steady and unreadable. "Officer Cooper," the chairwoman began, "you are here today to address the incident that occurred last week involving the new police commissioner. You understand the seriousness of this hearing?" "Yes, ma'am," Daniel said quietly. The proceedings began. They showed video footage from the courthouse security cameras. The moment replayed, the calm man in the gray suit, the sharp words, the sudden slap. Daniel could barely watch. It was like seeing someone else, someone full of pride and anger. He lowered his eyes as the sound of his own voice echoed through the speakers. "People need to learn their place." Those words hurt the most now. When the video ended, the room was silent. The chairwoman turned to him. "Officer Cooper, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Daniel stood. His throat felt dry, but his voice was steady. "Yes, ma'am. I have a lot to say." He took a breath. "I was wrong. There's no excuse for what I did. I acted out of arrogance, not duty. I forgot what my badge stood for. I embarrassed my department and myself. I don't ask for sympathy, but I want to apologize to everyone here and especially to Commissioner Lawson." He turned to face the commissioner directly. "Sir, I misjudged you. I thought I was enforcing respect, but I was doing the opposite. I can't change what happened, but I can change myself. And I will." The room stayed quiet for several long seconds. Then Commissioner Lawson stood up. His calm voice filled the room. "Officer Cooper," he began, "you're right. You made a mistake, a serious one. But I've seen far worse men refuse to admit it. The fact that you stand here and take responsibility means something." He paused, looking around the room. "We cannot build trust between officers and citizens if we allow disrespect to go unchallenged. But we also can't build trust by destroying people who are willing to learn. Accountability isn't about punishment, it's about change." Everyone listened closely. Daniel's heart thumped in his chest. Lawson continued, "Your suspension will remain for 3 months. During that time, you will complete community service and a training program on public engagement. You'll work with officers in neighborhoods you've never visited before. If you complete this with honesty and effort, your record will be restored." Daniel blinked. He had expected to be fired. He had prepared for the worst. Instead, he was being given something he didn't think he deserved, a second chance. "Thank you, sir," he said softly. Lawson nodded once. "Make it count." After the hearing ended, Daniel walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. The punishment was fair, but the words meant more than the sentence. He knew this wasn't the reward, it was a test. That evening, Daniel sat on his porch again, staring at the fading sky. For the first time in a long while, he felt something inside him shift. The man who had once thought respect was something he could demand was gone. In his place was someone who wanted to earn it step by step. The next week, Daniel began his community service. He was assigned to a youth outreach program in a neighborhood known for its distrust of police. At first, the residents looked at him with suspicion. Some refused to talk to him. Others whispered about his past. But Daniel didn't argue. He just listened. He helped paint walls at a local center, cleaned up streets, and spent afternoons talking to teenagers about their dreams. One day, a young boy asked him, "Why are you doing this? Aren't you a cop?" Daniel smiled. "I was. And I hope to be again. But right now, I'm just someone trying to make things right." The boy thought about that and nodded. "People make mistakes," he said. "My brother says that too." Daniel's heart softened. He realized that simple understanding was more powerful than any courtroom speech. Each day taught him something new about humility and connection. Weeks passed. The same community that once avoided him began to greet him warmly. They saw that he was trying. He wasn't the same officer who had walked through that courthouse door full of pride. He was someone learning to listen, to understand, and to respect. One afternoon, while helping organize a safety event, Daniel received a call from the commissioner's office. "Commissioner Lawson would like to see you tomorrow," the assistant said. Daniel's pulse quickened. The next day, he arrived at the commissioner's office on time. Lawson was waiting inside, standing by the window with a view of the city. "You've been doing good work," Lawson said, turning to face him. "I've been getting reports from the community leaders." Daniel nodded. "Thank you, sir. I just wanted to do better." Lawson studied him quietly. "Do you understand now what it means to serve?" Daniel nodded again. "Yes, sir. It means helping, not judging. Listening, not shouting. And remembering that every person deserves respect." For the first time, the commissioner smiled faintly. "Good. Keep that lesson close. You'll need it when you put the uniform back on." Daniel blinked, hardly believing what he heard. Sir, does that mean? Yes, Lawson said. You'll return to duty next month. But this time, you'll be assigned to community relations. You'll help train new recruits on what respect really means. Think of it as turning your mistake into a message. Daniel felt a wave of emotion. I won't waste this chance, sir. I promise. As he left the office, he realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't given because he deserved it. It was given because someone believed he could change. That night, for the first time in months, Daniel slept peacefully. He dreamed of the day he would wear his badge again, not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of what he had learned. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to walk it with humility, patience, and the newfound respect for everyone he once thought he understood. The morning Daniel returned to duty, the sky was clear and full of golden light. For weeks, he had dreamed of this moment, putting his uniform back on, clipping the badge to his chest, and stepping out into the world not as a man ashamed of his past, but as someone who had learned from it. This time, the uniform felt different. It wasn't a symbol of power anymore. It was a promise, a reminder that true respect came from actions, not authority. As he stood in front of the mirror, Daniel saw a changed man. The same face looked back at him, but his eyes were softer. The pride that used to make him walk with his chin high was replaced with something better: humility. He smiled faintly, took one deep breath, and whispered, "Do it right this time." When he arrived at the precinct, the atmosphere was mixed. Some officers greeted him politely, others avoided him. He didn't blame them. His name had been part of department gossip for weeks, but he didn't come back to be liked. He came back to rebuild trust, step by step. Commissioner Lawson had reassigned him to community relations, a role that focused on outreach, training, and rebuilding the bridge between officers and citizens. Daniel would visit schools, attend neighborhood meetings, and speak to young recruits about respect and communication. It was different from his old street patrol days, but in his heart, he knew this was where he needed to be. On his first day back, Lawson called him into his office. The commissioner stood by the window again, hands behind his back, calm as always. "How are you feeling, Officer Cooper?" "Nervous, sir," Daniel admitted honestly. Lawson nodded. "That's good. Nerves mean you care. Confidence without humility is what got you here in the first place. Remember that." "Yes, sir," Daniel said quietly. Lawson walked closer and handed him a folder. "You'll be leading a workshop this week for new recruits. Topic: what respect means in uniform. I want you to speak from experience. No rehearsed speeches. Just the truth." Daniel looked down at the folder, then back at the commissioner. "Sir, are you sure?" After everything that happened, Lawson interrupted gently. "That's exactly why you should do it. People learn best from those who've lived their mistakes." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand." That night, he sat at his kitchen table, trying to prepare for the workshop. He didn't write a long speech. Instead, he jotted down simple words on a piece of paper: respect, duty, listening, change. He thought about his journey, the courtroom, the suspension, the community service, the second chance. Every step had taught him something new. 2 days later, he stood in front of a group of young officers in the academy training room. Their faces were fresh, eager, and full of confidence, the same look he once had. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "When I first joined the force," Daniel said, "I thought wearing this uniform meant people had to respect me. I thought respect came from fear, from control. I was wrong." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Respect is not something you take, it's something you give first. If you treat people with dignity, they'll trust you. And if they trust you, they'll respect you. That's how real law enforcement works." One recruit raised his hand. "Sir, what made you realize that?" Daniel smiled sadly. A mistake. One I'll never forget. I disrespected someone I didn't know, and I paid for it. But that person didn't destroy my life. He taught me how to fix it. The recruits listened closely. They had all heard rumors, but hearing Daniel admit it openly made it real. It wasn't a story about punishment. It was about growth. At the end of the session, the recruits clapped. One young woman came up and said quietly, "Thank you, sir." I'll remember that. Her sincerity made Daniel's throat tighten. For the first time, he felt like his mistake had found a purpose. Over the next few months, Daniel threw himself into his new role. He worked with schools, community groups, and youth centers. Slowly, the same neighborhoods that once looked at him with suspicion began to welcome him. He joined cleanup drives, helped organize safety events, and even coached local kids in self-defense classes. He wasn't just enforcing the law anymore, he was building trust. One evening, during a town hall event, Commissioner Lawson arrived quietly to observe. Daniel didn't notice him at first. He was busy answering questions from local residents and listening to their concerns. When the event ended, Lawson approached him. "You've done well, officer," Lawson said. Daniel turned and smiled. "Thank you, sir. I just wanted to make up for what I broke." Lawson shook his head. "You didn't just fix what was broken. You turned it into something better. The community trusts you now. They see you as one of the good ones." Daniel felt a deep sense of pride, the kind that came not from ego, but from honesty. "I couldn't have done it without the chance you gave me," he said. Lawson looked at him for a moment. "Do you know why I didn't fire you that day?" Daniel hesitated. "Because you wanted to teach me a lesson?" Lawson smiled faintly. "Partly, but mostly because I saw a man who could learn it. I saw anger, yes, but also shame and the courage to face it. I've met many officers who hide behind pride. You didn't. That's why you're still here." Daniel nodded, his voice quiet. "I won't waste it, sir." As months turned into a year, Daniel's reputation slowly changed. The same department that once whispered about his mistake now praised his work. He was invited to join a new program focused on officer ethics and training. He didn't give fancy speeches or use complicated words. He just told stories. Real stories. Stories about patience, respect, and humility. One afternoon, as he left the office, a young officer stopped him in the hallway. "Sir," he said, "I heard your story during training. I just wanted to say it changed how I see people on patrol." "Thank you." Daniel smiled. "That means more than you know." He stepped outside and looked up at the evening sky. The golden light reminded him of that first day back, the day he decided to be better. He thought about the journey, the humiliation, the regret, the hard work, and realized every step had been necessary. Without the fall, he would never have understood the climb. A few weeks later, Daniel received a handwritten note on his desk. It was from Commissioner Lawson. The message was simple. Respect is not earned in a day. It's built in every choice we make. You've made the right ones. Keep going. Daniel folded the note carefully and placed it inside his badge case. It became a daily reminder of the lesson that changed his life. From then on, whenever he met a new recruit or a civilian in distress, he remembered where he came from, the man who once thought power was respect, and the leader who taught him what true respect really meant. Years later, people in the department still told the story of Officer Daniel Cooper, the man who made one terrible mistake but found redemption through humility. It became a quiet legend among recruits, not as a warning, but as a lesson in humanity. And every time Daniel walked past the courthouse where it all began, he would pause for a moment, take a breath, and whisper to himself, "Thank you, Commissioner Lawson, for teaching me how to serve again." Then he'd smile, straighten his badge, and step forward carrying not just the weight of his uniform, but the grace that came from truly understanding what it meant to wear it.